You're listening to As I Was Saying. I'm April Simpkins, and each episode we unpack what's quietly messing with your mental health at work and how to take your peace back without quitting everything. This podcast is for you if just pushing through is wrecking your peace. I'm breaking down the stuff we all deal with and giving you tools to actually do something about it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to As I Was Saying, the place where we talk about work, people, leadership, mental health, and all the things folks want to say out loud at work, but usually just keep to themselves. I'm April Simpkins, and today we're talking about religion in the workplace. Now, this is one of those topics that makes people nervous real fast. Leaders get quiet. Employees get careful. Everybody starts acting like if we just don't say the word religion at work, somehow the issue will politely disappear. Well, it won't, because religion in the workplace is not some fringe issue that rarely comes up. It shows up in scheduling, dress codes, grooming standards, prayer, religious attire, time off, harassment, team dynamics, supervisor behavior, accommodation requests. And when it's mishandled, it can absolutely turn into a legal issue. Now, I've spoken on this topic before because it's one of those areas where people are often underinformed and overconfident, which is never a good combination. There's a presentation I did on this topic called Divine Diversity, and it focused on helping people stop treating religion at work like a taboo subject and start treating it like what it is, a real workplace issue that requires policy, dialogue, and good judgment. And what brought me back to it today is a recent EEOC case involving Blue Eagle Contracting. Now, according to the EEOC, the company hired a Christian truck driver in September 2022. They knew he needed Sunday mornings for church. When the company lost a driver who worked the Sunday shift, the Christian trucker agreed to temporarily cover Sunday shifts until a replacement was found. The problem arose when they allegedly kept scheduling him for Sundays, even after a replacement was hired. The EEOC says he was forced to choose between his faith and his job, and he resigned in December 2022. Now, the lawsuit was just announced on April 3rd, 2026, and I will absolutely be keeping my eyes on this one. So in this episode, I want to talk about what religion in the workplace actually means, where employers get it wrong, and what smart leaders do instead. Now, let's start with the biggest misconception. So many people think religion at work only counts if it looks familiar to them, if it sounds like a major faith tradition they recognize or practice they've heard of before. Then they think, okay, that sounds real. But if it's unfamiliar, unusual, deeply personal, or not something they quite understand, they start treating it like a preference instead of a protected issue. And that's where people get into trouble. Title VII broadly protects religion, not narrowly. It's not limited to what looks traditional or comfortable. It can include beliefs and practices that are uncommon or not tied to a formal church or held by a small number of people. It can also protect people who have no religious belief at all. And that matters because leaders sometimes start asking the wrong questions. Questions like, is that really part of their religion? Do other people in that religion do that? I've never heard of that. Or that sounds personal, like it's something somebody just made up. But I digress. None of those questions is the right starting point. The real question is whether there is a sincerely held belief or practice that conflicts with a work rule and whether the company can reasonably accommodate it without undue hardship. That's the lane, not amateur theology, not personal opinion, not managerial irritation dressed up as business judgment. For example, there are men and women who prefer not to do one-on-one lunch and dinner meetings with someone of the opposite sex, whether that's because of their religion, their preference, or protection. The fact is, it's a closely held belief, and that can be covered under Title VII. And there are ways to address that properly. Now, here's where this conversation gets even more interesting. Employers don't just get in trouble for ignoring religion, they can also get in trouble for pushing belief-based practices in the workplace. Now, stay with me on this. There's a case out there called the Onion Head case. No, I swear to you, I'm not making this up. You can Google it. If you have never heard of it, the name alone sounds like something nobody should be suggesting during a company meeting, but let's move forward. The case is real, and it's a cautionary tale. One important distinction here, and I want to be very clear about this. Onion Head was not a traditional religion. This was not a case about an employer promoting a recognized faith in some obvious way. This was a case where the employer created or adopted a belief system as part of its culture branding, then paralleled it to characteristics we usually associate with religion or spirituality. That's where things got dangerous. And according to the EEOC, United Health Programs and its parent company coerced employees to participate in ongoing activities that included group prayer, candle burning, discussions of spiritual texts, wearing these onion head buttons, placing onion head cards near workstations, and working in dim lighting. The EEOC said none of it was work-related, and employees who opposed participating or didn't participate fully were terminated. That is what makes the Onion Head case so useful for leaders to understand. Not everything labeled culture, values, positivity, wellness, or togetherness is harmless. If your company starts building rituals and symbols and practices and pressure around a belief-based system, and employees feel they need to join in to stay in good standing, you may have crossed the line from culture building into coercion. I had a client years ago who had an employee that called my consulting firm on the employee hotline. And his complaint was that every time they had a team meeting, the supervisor led everyone in a Christian prayer. The employee who contacted me was Jewish. And while he tried to politely remain quiet out of respect for the others in the room who participated in the prayer, was starting to bother him. He worried, though, that if he objected to starting the meeting that way, that he'd have to deal with consequences. I thanked him for raising the concern, and then I reached out to the supervisor, who initially was a little defensive. He thought I was going to tell him that he couldn't include prayer at the start of their meetings. For me, this was an easy fix. I told the supervisor, moving forward, that if the meeting started at, let's say, 10 a.m., that he should share that for any employee who wanted to arrive at 9:55 a.m. for a short prayer before the meeting, they were welcome to join him. That left the prayer as an option. It removed it from the agenda and left space for anyone who didn't want to participate in the prayer, the option of reserving that right. And that's exactly what employers miss sometimes. They think, but we meant well, or we thought it was uplifting, or this was supposed to build connection. Intent does not erase impact. It does not erase coercion. And it definitely does not erase legal exposure. A later report on the Onion Head verdict described the behavior as cult-like and noted that 10 workers were awarded $5.1 million. So yes, employers can get into trouble by refusing to respect someone's faith, and they can also get into trouble by creating a workplace culture that pressures employees into belief-based participation. That matters just as much as the Blue Eagle case, because together they show kind of both sides of the same issue. On the one side, you have an employer allegedly failing to accommodate an employee's religious practice. On the other side, you have an employer allegedly imposing belief-based practices into the workplace. In both situations, the common problem is the same. The employer crossed the line. Now, let's go back to the Blue Eagle case just for a minute, because it really does show how ordinary these issues can look at first. This wasn't some giant dramatic showdown in the boardroom. This appears to have been a scheduling issue, a request. The employer knew there was a conflict, and yet allegedly the company still didn't fix it. That's why this topic matters so much. Most religious discrimination issues at work don't start with fireworks. They start with routine business decisions, scheduling, time off, uniforms, grooming, shift assignments, training expectations, comments from supervisors, and then somebody handles it badly. Too often, the problem is not that the employer had no options. The problem is that the employer didn't really engage in a dialogue. They heard the request and immediately treated it as an inconvenience. That's just lazy leadership. Employers don't have to approve every request. I want to make that clear. They are allowed to consider undue hardship, but employers do need to assess the issue seriously. They need to talk through options. They need to think before they react. And this is where good employers separate themselves from reckless ones. Good employers have a clear discrimination and harassment policy that includes religion. Good employers train managers to recognize accommodation requests and know when to involve HR. They don't automatically reject requests without a conversation. They understand that religious protections also extend to people with no religion. And they know supervisor behavior can feel coercive, even when the supervisor thinks that they're just sharing or they're being encouraging. That coercion piece is worth pausing on. A supervisor has power, whether they mean to or not. So if a leader is organizing prayer at work and pressuring people to participate in spiritual activities, making religion part of team identity, or creating an atmosphere where opting out feels risky, that's a problem. Not because people can't have personal faith. They can, but because leaders do not get to use their position to shape other people's religious participation. And harassment matters here too. Religious discrimination is not limited to accommodation requests. It can also include offensive remarks, repeated mockery, exclusion, hostility, or pressure around someone's beliefs or non-beliefs, and even anti-religious conduct can be protected territory. Now I want to pause here and make a very clear point. Title VII is about protecting your right to practice your faith or non-faith. It does not protect someone imposing their belief on others. So when employers are in conversation with an employee about an accommodation for their faith, the goal is to determine how to support their request so they can exercise their faith. This is different from someone imposing their faith on other employees, where some employers get this wrong. For example, if I work for a company that's open 24/7, like a hospital, and for religious reasons, I don't work on Easter, my request is to have Easter off. My request should not be that the hospital close on Easter so everyone can celebrate that religious holiday. Now, let's talk about the mental health side of this, because I'm not skipping that. When people feel like they have to hide a core part of themselves, constantly defend their beliefs, or calculate whether asking for accommodations will make them look difficult, it creates stress. real stress. It chips away at trust, creates tension, hypervigilance, and that exhausting feeling of having to manage yourself extra carefully just to get through the workday. That's a problem. And when leaders mishandle religion at work, the damage isn't limited to the one employee at the center of the issue. Other people are watching. They are paying attention to whether the workplace is fair, whether differences are respected, whether leadership is mature enough to handle human complexity without turning it into a threat. That observation shapes culture. So yes, this is a compliance issue. Yes, this is a leadership issue, but it's also a mental health issue because people do not feel psychologically safe in environments where their beliefs are dismissed, coerced, mocked, or treated like an inconvenience. So what should leaders do, you ask? First, stop treating religion in the workplace like an untouchable topic. It is not too awkward to address. It is too important to ignore. Second, train your managers because policies do not enforce themselves. Managers are usually the first people to hear the request, see the conflict, or create the problem. Third, create a real process for religious accommodation, not a vague promise, a process. And fourth, remember that respect does not equal endorsement. Accommodating someone's rights is not the same as adopting their beliefs. And fifth, ask a better question, not just, do I agree with this? Or is this easy for us? Ask, are we handling this fairly, legally, and with enough maturity to avoid creating harm where there just doesn't need to be any? Because when employers get religion in the workplace wrong, they don't just risk lawsuits, they damage trust and they weaken the culture. And sometimes they force people into choices they should never have to make in the first place. So here are my 3 takeaways. For leaders, don't wait until a complaint lands on your desk to figure out how your company handles religion at work. Review your policies, train your managers, and build a process before you need it. And for employees, if you need a religious accommodation, be clear about the conflict and what you're asking for. You don't need fancy legal language, but clarity helps. And this one's for everyone. Respect at work does not require agreement. It requires fairness, maturity, and the ability to deal with differences without turning them into punishment, pressure, or silence. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. And if this resonates, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. This is April Simpkins on As I Was Saying. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and be well.